All right, everybody, it's Thursday at 6 p.m. We have a special edition of Conversations with Commodores. And by the way, I'm going to reschedule with the Anchor Impact Fund in a couple of weeks. But we have got, before there was Bo Jackson, before there was Deion Sanders, we had our own. We had Scotti Madison. Scotty played baseball and football coming out of Pensacola. He couldn't figure out which sport was best, but ultimately he ended up with a very nice major league career. We're going to get into all of that. Welcome, Scotty. Thank you for making some time for us tonight. How's your day going?
It's going well. Thank you for taking time to give me a shout and be a part of this Commodore Nation.
Oh, this is such my fun. I can assure you it is all my pleasure. We already got some Commodores rolling through, Scotty. We got Kenny Cole. We got Mark Matlock. And as folks roll in, I'll let you know who's there with us.
Those are some great guys and great friends. I had great stories and memories with them, that's for sure. I don't think I can share them on this network right now, but I enjoyed them.
Well, Scotty, let me tell you, we've already had Ken Hammond on the show, so he has really set the bar. So really, anything you want to share tonight, I'm sure would pale from Kenny.
I hear you. I got you.
Scotty, you came out of Pensacola, and I know that you played every sport under the sun, whatever, just like my generation, I'm just a little younger than you. Whatever the season was, we played that sport. Was that your childhood? What was going on with you after school every day?
Well, my dad grew up kind of hard in Atmore, Alabama, and he played all the sports, and he ended up, he was a starting right halfback at Georgia, 52 to 55 under Wally Butts. And then he also played baseball. And the reason he played baseball so he wouldn't have to practice spring practice football. And so he had a little bit of baseball knowledge. But I the other day I was looking at some old videos, and when I was about 4 years old, I had a football in my hand thrown on the video. I was hitting both ways, left-handed, right-handed. He had me throwing left-handed, had me throwing right-handed. I mean, so whatever sport was in season, that's what you picked up. And I really think it's probably healthy to do that if you can.
I've read enough and heard enough from Dr. Andrews and all the sports medicine folks that just these overuse injuries are starting too early, throwing curveballs or whatever it may be. They always encourage the kids, play a sport, rest, play another sport, do other things. And that was our childhood. I played whatever the sport of the season was, and clearly it sounds like you did too from a very young age. What was life like in Pensacola, Florida in the 70s?
Well, I mean, it was the place to be. I mean, I grew up in an area called Myrtle Grove, and Myrtle Grove was really accomplished Dixie youth baseball. So it was quite competitive. There was a lot of players that came out of there that went on and not only played college, but many played actually in the major leagues from the little Myrtle Grove area. So the competition was really good, but we played a lot in the streets. We'd pick up games and football, pick up games, basketball, just whatever it was. And I just think it was a healthy thing. But I didn't play any organized sports until I was 9. And at 9 years old, I played baseball. Didn't play any organized sports in basketball until I was probably in the 8th grade. And then, believe it or not, I did not play football until I was in the 9th grade.
Wow.
9th grade. I did not play any organized football until then.
Wow. Well, and may it be an unfair question, but did you have a favorite sport as a youth, or did it develop? Did you become a little better or more accomplished, more confidence in one sport or the other?
Well, obviously I couldn't jump. I wasn't tall. I was white and I couldn't jump. So basketball was not going to go anywhere, but I did enjoy shooting, and I was pretty good about anticipating where the pass was going to be. I just couldn't make the layups when I went down the court. I mean, literally several times I'd hit the rim and it hit me in the head and about knocked me out. So basketball was not going to be my forte, but I love baseball and football, and they were both great. And I think what really probably got me my football, my uncle was a great football coach. He was at one time the winningest high school football coach in Florida. And back then we were beginning to run the Veer offense. And he actually would go to Houston and work with Bill Yeeman, who created the Houston Veer offense. And we were way ahead of everybody. I mean, he just did so much discipline in the sport, and reading the tackle and pitching off the end and taking the ball and pitching off the cornerback. And, so I enjoyed that. And Tate, we had we might have had 8 or 10,000 people at a high school football game. So that kind of made you like, football during the fall. And of course, the baseball was highly competitive. And so when that spring came around, it was all baseball.
Well, let's kind of fast forward a little bit into your high school years. And at what point, Scotty, did it start percolating in your thought process? I may want to play sports in college, and maybe I need to really start honing my crafts for the future.
Well, as a freshman, I was a starting shortstop on the varsity baseball team.
Mhm.
As a sophomore, I was a starting quarterback. So I was receiving letters, as a freshman, as a sophomore, back then, and a lot of letters. And then I was able to, win some awards, I guess, from, Northwest Florida was pretty good football area. LA Lower Alabama, as we called it down there. And so I'd won like football player of the year or something as a sophomore, and then the same thing as my senior year. So I was receiving letters, and then, back then you could visit 5 schools of which they would pay for.
Mhm.
And I had many more, that you were wanting to go to. And so it was a tough decision. And, I knew I was going to get a chance to go play somewhere, and my school paid for it. And that was important because my parents were both in education, and they really emphasized, you need to get a degree, you need to go to a college and get a degree, but they never really told me where I should go. They did tell me where I was not going to go, but they didn't tell me where I should go.
Well, geographically, Pensacola being on that panhandle, you had Southern Miss, you had Bama, Florida, you had Florida State, so many schools regionally. But how did you, I guess, cull through all of those schools to decide to go up north? I say north to Nashville. Yeah.
Well, there was a guy named Mickey Lakos who had played football at Vanderbilt and was a good football player. He was a friend of my dad. And my dad, he could fly a plane, but we didn't own a plane. He said, look, if you'll pay for the gas and the time on the airplane, we'll get Scotty up to Vanderbilt. And I was really heavily looking at Alabama, as I know that Kenny Cole was. Mm-hmm. But Coach Bryan had come and recruited me, and then LSU was really into the picture. Charlie Mack came to the house, and so that was a really heavy choice. But when Mickey Lakos said, hey, we'll go up to Nashville and we'll see Vanderbilt, it was up there during the fall. I'd never seen leaves change color. Mm-hmm. They set me right in between Dr. Rob Roy Purdy, who at the time was the vice chancellor of the university, and Mr. Fred Russell. And I just felt like they were just such distinguished gentlemen. It was just really incredible. I mean, and it was a surprise visit. I mean, I had no idea where Vanderbilt was. My dad had great respect for Mickey Lakos, and told me that Mr. Lakos had given him the hardest lick he'd ever received in the Southeastern Conference. So I had a little bit about Vanderbilt football, and I think that year they ended up being 7-4 or something along those lines, and went to the Peach Bowl. So they were winning, and it just seemed like the right thing for me to come up here and go to school.
Well, Scotty, you had the added component of not just one sport, but you had 2 sports that you were very serious about. And you told me a few weeks ago when we saw each other at McGugin, you did something that I wished I would have followed your playbook. How is it that you were able to play both sports at Vanderbilt, being a quarterback as one of your positions?
Well, it's a very good question. Back then, they had what was the SEC letter of intent, and that was in December. But then they had a national letter of intent that was in February. So I'd come up, and of course, right after December, I mean, football's fresh and over with. And so I'd signed an SEC letter to go to Vanderbilt and play football. Well, it's not long in Pensacola, Florida, when the warm weather gets warmer and you start playing baseball. I said, I'm not thinking I'm going to play football. I think I'm just going to play baseball, because South Carolina and FSU had offered me full rides to play baseball. So I called Coach Pancoast and said, hey, Coach, I appreciate the opportunity to come to Vanderbilt, but I'm not going to play any football. I'm just going to play baseball. Mm-hmm. Well, I got a phone call, I don't know, a couple of days later from Dr. Rob Roy Purdy. And he said, Scotty, he said, I talked with Coach Pancoast, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I said, I want to give you a full ride to come to Vanderbilt, and you don't have to play any sports. And I go, really? I said, you serious? He goes, yep. He said, I want you to come to Vanderbilt. I said, well, what if I want to play some sports? He said, well, we'll work that out, that you can also play some sports. I said, well, you work it out that I can play both football and baseball. And when you sign something stating I can do that, that if I want to quit one, that I can just play the other and still be on a full ride to Vanderbilt. He said, I'll sign that piece of paper. So he signed that piece of paper stating I could play either one or both and still be on a scholarship. But also in that stated that I had to go through spring practice football my freshman year, but I did not have to go through spring practice football any other year. And that's where Coach Pancos and I got a little sideways.
Well, I could been there and done that, but you made it work. So let's kind of move past Tate High School. You've graduated. It's time to come up to school, and it's the fall of '76. What is your expectations at this point, or did you have any for either or both sports, or just the experience as a whole?
Well, my expectations, I was going to hit the ground running, but that didn't happen because I'd come up in the summer and I was playing baseball for Larry Schmitto. He had a little high school summer team. Jack Newsmer was on the team, Robert Harris, Mike Ralston, Barry Ralston. There were a bunch of players that were very good athletes in the Nashville area. And Robert, I was playing shortstop, and Robert made a bad pickoff play to second base. And I was up on one leg, and the runner came back in and hurt my knee. So I showed up to Vanderbilt football my freshman year on crutches.
Oh, boy.
Which is not a good start. And, of course, the first thing Dr. Pinky Grant Lipscomb wanted to do was to have surgery on me. I said, you are not cutting on me, because I've seen some of those scars of some of these players walking around here. You're not doing that to me. So I started doing a lot of rehab, which probably was a blessing in the long run as I eventually became a catcher. It helped my, the quads and the thighs and things like this. I started doing a lot of leg exercises, worked my way back, and probably about 5 weeks into the season, maybe 4 or 5 weeks into the season, I was at starting scout team quarterback, running everybody else's offense. So I was good to go from that point forward.
Well, I guess you had gotten back, I assume, into Coach Pancos' good graces since you had returned to the team and were able to practice.
That particular year, it was because I actually went through spring practice football, which my baseball suffered. I think I maybe hit 4 or 5 home runs that year, not that many. And so my sophomore year, I was playing very well and hitting the ball well with a lot of home runs. And Coach Pancos came to me because he goes, look, you got a chance to be my starting quarterback. And I don't blame him, because here's the deal. His job's on the line. He's going to get fired if they don't win. He said, I need you to come out there and practice, football. So, well, Coach, I'll come out and watch. I said, but I'm not going to participate in pads. He goes, well, you are. I tell you are. I said, well, Coach, we signed an agreement stating that I didn't have to do that. He said, I don't care what that agreement says. If you want to play football at Vanderbilt, you're going to get out there in the spring and play football. Well, I was playing a rock and a hard place. And I called my dad up and I said, Dad, this is where I am. He said, son, you're in a bad place right now. He said, because you go over his head, he is never going to forget that. And you're going to be in a lot of trouble. I said, well, Dad, I don't have any other choice. So I showed up at Dr. Purdy's office and asked if he still had that piece of paper, and he had it filed away, and he pulled it out. And I told him what was going on. He said, Scotty, let me tell you something. We go over there and Coach Pancos comes in that room, it's not going to be pretty for you when practice starts. He said, I can control it here, but once it gets out there on the field, it's a whole different ball game, And sure enough, Clay Stapleton called Coach Pancos in, and that his neck was quivering like this. And he was, he got as red as you could possibly be. They go, Fred, didn't we sign an agreement with Scotty stating that he didn't have to practice football? Yeah. Then why are you making him practice football? He didn't have an answer. So, Scotty, you need to step out. Whew. So the next day, Coach Pancos found me and apologized. He said, if you can just come out there and watch. And what was happening, we weren't doing very well. And every spring we were having a new offensive coordinator. A new offense was coming in. And, if I was going to participate, they wanted me out there. Well, I didn't go through that. I played baseball. And I knew the next fall when I showed up, they were going to try to run me off. And that's when David Lee was my quarterback coach. So I worked out exceedingly hard. I came back, best shape I've ever been, made all the runs, beat everybody making all the runs and everything. But the first day of practice, Coach Pancos had, I think, Coach Emmanuel, one of those coaches out there saying, keep Scotty out here until he doesn't want to come back. So that was my sophomore year eligibility wise, junior year school wise.
Wow. Well, go back up just a little bit and talk about it's so different now because we see how the coaches at the different respective sports, at least publicly, seem to get along. Privately, we have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. But when you have athlete who could play and start in both sports, that becomes, it seems like a real conflict for the coaches. Do you remember conversations with baseball about football and vice versa? Well, of course you did with football, but what about the baseball world?
No, I mean, Coach Schmittou was pretty clever. I mean, Coach Schmittou, he was a baseball coach, and I think they were paying him about $8,000 a year at the time. So he said that he would head up recruiting for football for another $8,000, which doubled his salary. And of course, he was smart enough to say, if I'm going to sign football players, I'm going to make sure they can also play baseball. Mm-hmm. So he did that with Mike Wright. And of course, they did that with Mark Elliott, played basketball and baseball. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really have too much conflict then, because once baseball season's over, it's over. I mean, there's no spring football, there's no extra lifting weights. And back then, nobody lifted weights. I mean, it was unheard of, so there was no really a great deal of conditioning other than in February. What was happening, I was having to go through the conditioning of football, and the baseball players were going through the conditioning of baseball, and then I would just show up, to practice, so I didn't do the baseball and the football conditioning.
That was going to be my next question was, did you ever find that working out for one sport or the other either deconditioned you or changed some aspect of your sport, the other sport, like your baseball swing, because you were doing a bunch of, certain types of reps? Did that ever impact your abilities?
We did a lot of clean and jerk, and we had buckets set up in there. I think Mark Madlock, he probably threw up every day when he was in there. I think I remember, if he's on this line, I think he did.
He is.
Yeah, I think he did. So they had buckets set up in there, and we might do some clean and jerks, but they actually, if you were a quarterback, you didn't do quite what everything did. They didn't really understand the importance of weightlifting, during that time period. So you were a little bit lighter. So I was, probably because of that, I didn't have to do a great deal of stuff to really put a lot of damage on my shoulders or my lower back. So that I was fortunate back in the era, back during that time.
Guys, I've got Scotti Madison, one of our first two-way players, played in the late 70s, early 80s for Vanderbilt. He was a quarterback in football and played multiple positions, including catcher and first base in baseball. Scotty, I know that David Lee, former Vanderbilt quarterback, has been a big influence on you. You've had him on your podcast of recent. Share a little bit of that insight about your relationship with David and the impact that he's had with you.
Coach Lee, it could be one of the finest men I've ever met, and certainly an incredible football coach. But I remember that particular year when Coach Pancos didn't think too well of me, and he was trying to kind of run me off because I'd kind of embarrassed him during the spring. Well, David Lee was a quarterback coach. Well, he was the one in between. Of course, I found about this later, but Coach Lee approached me when I was with the Dodgers organization playing Albuquerque. He was coaching New Mexico, and he came up to me and said, Scotty, I want you to know, he said, I ruined your football career. He said, you should have been my starting quarterback. He goes, I didn't stand up to Coach Pancos. He said, Fred, he said, I didn't stand up to him. He said, Fred, this guy, he said, he's not flashy. He's just going to get the ball in the end zone. That's all we need to do. He said, but I didn't do that. He said, I was young, second year in coaching. I wanted to keep my job. I didn't stand up like I thought I should. He said, and what happened is quarterbacks were scuffling a little bit, and we'd lost some games, and they'd already decided they were going to redshirt me into my sophomore year. Mm-hmm. So about 5 games into the season, Coach Lee calls me in because I saw an article in the paper that says Madison to come off redshirt to start against Ole Miss. I'm going, what? So Coach Lee calls me up and he said, hey, we've changed our mind. We're taking you off red shirt. We're going to start you, next week, against Ole Miss. Well, I traveled. I didn't play. The next week, I guarantee I was going to play. And somehow we had boy, for some reason I think his name was Bill Hart. I can't think who he was. I'm not really sure, but anyway, he ended up. It was on the Thursday practice. He ended up busting through the line, grabbed my ankle, twisted it, and popped it. And so I was done for the rest of the season, you know. And so that was it for me, you know, for sophomore. I didn't come back. And then the next year, Coach Lee had gone, I believe, and I'm not sure who our quarterback coach was, but the bottom line, and I got a chance to start the last 3 games my junior year, I had 2 more years of eligibility left, against Kentucky, Air Force, and then Tennessee. And so the transition, Fred Pankos was fired, Coach Mack was coming in, and what a great man he was, you know, and I just didn't play for him. I just played baseball my senior year.
So you find out through the newspaper.
Yes.
And you think social media is quick these days.
Oh yeah, back then we'd get a little newspaper, see what was going on. It was either Tennessee or Nashville Banner. I read it and I immediately, you know, you didn't have any phones anywhere, and you know, so you had to go back to your dorm room to make a phone call. So I just ran over real quick to the football offices, and Coach Lee said, "Yeah, we're going to bring that up to you in this Monday practice, but you're going to start practicing with the varsity, and we're going to start you this week." But that didn't happen. But Coach Lee, back to him. He was such a man, just a great man of God, loves the Lord, and has had such a great career. And in fact, I remember several things that he told us. He said, "Look, when you cross that line and you walk across that football field," he said, "everything that's on the other side of this field," he said, "you don't take it on the football field with you." He said, "When you leave football field and you come back across this line, all the problems you have in football, you don't take them in your personal life." You know, I always said that the quarterback has got to have thick skin and little ears. You know, he said that's what a good quarterback has. And so he was just such a great mentor and so important to me. And now even, you know, his career has been such that when there's a quarterback in the National Football League that's scuffling in between the ears, you know, they hired David Lee to come in and work with this guy to sort of settle him down and get him on the right track.
He's like a QB savant, if you will.
I get it.
Kenny Cole said it was Bill Orca Hart over 3
Bill
years.
Orca Hart, that's it, Bill Hart. The last time I saw him, he was running up down the stadium steps.
Scotty, I want to take you to that Air Force game. This is the fall of 78, November 18th, 1978, Air Force at home, a 41-27 win. Is there anything memorable about that particular game for you?
You know, that was certainly probably but my highlight in football. It was exciting. I can remember coming to the line of scrimmage and Loy Hudgens was on the line, who Kenny knows well. Loy was from Athens, Alabama, and Tommy Woodruff. Loy was from Huntsville. Okay, and then Tommy Woodruff was from Athens, and he was a left tackle, and Loy's on the left side too. And I came up and I audible, and I remember Loy go, "What's he doing?" And Tommy goes, "He's audible and dummy. He's audible and like this, you know." So I changed the play. So that day I changed the play, I think 7 times. Either 5 or 6 of those times, Mordecai took it to the end zone and scored touchdowns on. And that was the day he ended up breaking the record, which I think he still holds the record in the SEC with McFadden from Arkansas. And that was the day Bill Parcells was coaching the Air Force. And so we ended up winning that game. And, you know, and I think at the end of the game, Coach Pankos, "Well, Scotty had a pretty good game," you know, type deal. So, but anyway, I remember all of those 6 or 7 times, and Frank Mordecai, he could run like the wind, man, and score.
Well, that's what I was just getting ready to say. What's notable to me from that game is that Mordecai set the record, and that Coach Parcells, who used to coach at Vanderbilt, was the Air Force coach that game. Scotty, that particular season was the fall of 78. The next fall, Coach Mack comes in. You're not playing football anymore. So to the extent that you want to talk about that transition, was it a hard decision not to play football anymore? Was baseball becoming your go-to sport and you were finding some real success? What was going on for you from an athletics standpoint?
Well, there was certainly more success in baseball was taking place. I mean, we were 2-9 3 years in a row, and buddy, that wears on you. And and even though we're 2-9, every game we played, I believe we're going to win.
Mhm.
But what would happen? We lose on Saturday. We lose on Saturday. I would come and watch Fred Vanco's show at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning. We lose again. Then I watch game films, and then we lose again in the afternoon, the game films. And it was just wearing on me. But yet, by Wednesday or Thursday night, I'd call my dad up and say, Dad, look, we have found a way. We're going to beat Alabama. I'm just telling you right now, I believe we're going to beat Alabama. We're going to beat LSU or Georgia, whoever it was. My dad would say, son, I hope you're right. I hope you do. And then we lose. And that was really tough. But the hard thing probably for me was not playing football was to leaving behind the guys like Kenny Cole or Matlock or Ken Hammond or, Wayman Buggs or, all these guys that I'd played with and wide receivers and, that because what happens, it's not necessarily the games that makes people close. To me, it's the workouts, it's the practices, it's the pain and the suffering you go through and the conditioning. That creates a lifetime of friendship. That creates a camaraderie. Games are nothing. Games are fun. You go out and win. But it's going through the two-a-days or doing all the extra running or the ups and downs as Fred Pankos used to do all the time like that. That creates that great friendship. And that's what felt I was going to miss. I felt like I was going to miss the friendship of those particular guys, that I was leaving it to pursue baseball. But unfortunately, that's what I had to do.
Well, you have to make decisions that are for the better for yourself, of course. You go through, I guess it's 3 or 4 football seasons, school terms, and then you're now focused for probably the very first time in your sports career on only one sport. Was that different for you? Did it seem natural that you're now retired from football? You're now just a baseball player or solely a baseball player?
Well, I was able, and that's a good question. I was able to actually, obviously, play fall baseball practice, which was that was very odd for me. Participating in the fall baseball practice, but also that year, I got a chance to play on the 1979 team that went to Havana, Cuba. We were the first baseball team that had played in Cuba in 25 years, and on that team were guys like Terry Francona and Joe Carter. I mean, I think we may have had 24 players. I think 23 I was played in the major leagues. So there were some pretty hot shot, baseball players on that team. But to go to Cuba, to play the Cubans, to actually shake Castro's hand, that's another story. But anyway, that was a very special fall. But when I got back, what was still required of me, they were wanting me to work in the press box. And to back then, you would get these, they would take these photos. And it was almost like in a facsimile machine. They would print out. So they'd print them out and they would show, this is what the formation they're doing. This is the defense they're running. And I would have to run them down from the press box onto the field and then, go back up along those lines. So I was still active, and it was it was tough because, these were my guys, I'd see them coming off the field, man, they're bleeding, they're hurting, and I'm not there. I'm just running up down the press box. But that's what I had to do because that I had to do that in order to get ready for the baseball season in '80, which we ended up winning the SEC, that particular year.
Well, I was going to say your body didn't go through the toll of yet another football season. Maybe you rested up a little bit and a little more fresh going into spring.
I tell you what made it easier, and that is true. What made it easier, I had so much time to study. Oh my gosh. I mean, school became easy all of a sudden. I mean, or easier, because it was a little hard playing a couple sports and then, trying to do the school and stuff. And I also noticed that Vanderbilt actually had co-eds going there. I didn't have time, but buddy, that senior year, I made up for it.
I would have no doubt. But Scotti, let me ask you, your time up in the press box or being around those who were covering the team or the university, were you ever around Fred Russell or any of these well-known sports writers who were based in Nashville?
Oh yeah, Mr. Russell and I would probably go to lunch about once a month. We kept a great friendship. Are you there? Oh,
Yeah.
you can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mr. Russell and I would go to lunch about once a month, and we kept a great friendship. And he took a liking to me, so I was always still around him, pretty much on a regular basis. And I saw Dr. Purdy, and I was one of those students, and I don't want to say a brown nose, but I think I was smart enough in order to, know my professors. They knew my name, and they knew what I needed to make. School, and I love college. I mean, I loved Vanderbilt. I mean, if they'd have said, hey, when I had to go back, I was 9 hours short of graduating. I know I'm rambling on here, but I was 9 hours short of graduating after I'd signed with the Minnesota Twins. Mm-hmm. And I signed for a whopping $12,000. Now, let me tell you what, I was in the third round, second catcher in the draft. My agent is Robert Fraley. Okay, Robert Fraley died in the plane crash with Payne Stewart. I was the first guy Robert represented, and he only got me $12,000 because the Twins were tightwads. Okay, so I got to come back and graduate. So I go and see Mr. Kramer. Coach Kramer, I walk in there, and you talking about an incredible man, highly intimidating, but just a great man, a visionary. I mean, the god of Southeastern Conference. I mean, he really was at the time. Mm-hmm. This is not long before he became the SEC commissioner. And I said, Coach Kramer, I said, I am 12. I mean, I'm 3 classes, 9 hours short of graduating. He goes, well, you have fulfilled all your eligibility. What are you expecting me to do? I said, well, Coach, I said, I really want to graduate, and I don't really have the money to be able to pay. Can Vanderbilt help me pick up these last, 3 classes? Mm-hmm. He went on again. You don't have any more eligibility, this, that, and the other. And I knew his wife. I can't think of her name. Anyway, someone will give you a name anyway. Mary, something like. Anyway, the double name. I knew she liked baseball, and I knew that Coach Kramer and them were down at the SEC championships. We were down there. I saw them down in the left field line. And I said, Coach, wouldn't it be a shame if Vanderbilt's first All-American in baseball didn't graduate? He looked at me. He said, well, yes, it would. He said, go see Coach Schaefer, and he'll work something out with you, and then go see Mickey Jacobs and get a room. So this is the funny part, okay? So I've got my books paid for. They even gave me a little card or something. I can get, lunch or something every now and then, or breakfast. But now I need a place to stay. And I had lived in 527, which was Double Towers over there in Carmichael Towers, okay? And I'd lived there the year before with a baseball player named David Nenad. And so Coach Jacobs said, look, there's a football player in 427, double room. There's a football player in 527. You go work something out with them. I'll go, okay. I don't know who the player was, and God, I hope it wasn't Matlock or Kenny Cole. But anyway, or somebody else listed. But I remember walking in there to 527. I said, hey, he knew who I was. I said, Coach Jacobs thinks it's a good idea the football players need to live together. I'm gonna move you down to 427 because he said this is my room. But he goes, okay. So I had a double room, 9 hours. I was trying to sell insurance 2 days a week. I would have done that for 10 years if they'd have signed me up on that deal.
I don't know about living in Carmichael Towers for 10 years, but yeah, that does sound like you worked a pretty good deal. And that's guys, I've got Scotti Madison, and Scotty's sharing with us his journey through the Vanderbilt years, and I sure appreciate him spending some time. Scotty, I want you to kind of transition a little bit away from the Vanderbilt and into the business world, because I know you've had a lot of success. I know that you speak all the time. You educate folks. Take that mindset that you have developed as a child, as a confident athlete, as a professional athlete. How did you get that to work for you in the business world?
Well, I think that if I'm hiring somebody out of college, I mean, I think more than likely I'm gonna probably hire somebody who's probably participated in sports, and probably the greater their failure, probably the greater they're going to be in business, because you're going to get knocked down, you got to get back up. I mean, I know Vanderbilt was, kind of teaching me all along, you can't play ball all your life. It's, you and I had talked about this when we were able to speak in front of the football players not too long ago, is that football is not who you are, football is what you do, and who you are is made up of a lot of things, from family, from history, from your background, from the school you go to, from the friends that you have, so I learned network. I learned to call on folks. I learned to try to remember people's names. I learned to realize that if I don't have something they need, I don't need to be selling them something. I need to be finding something else for them to do. So I learned to try to connect people, and that I might meet you and you might tell me what you do, and Mark Madlock or Kenny Cole or, or Tommy Woodruff or somebing like that, they maybe do the exact same thing you need. So might introduce you together, then later on in life, you'd come back and said, hey, I'll call on you and you maybe want to do business with me. So my dad had worked for Aflac in the insurance world a long time ago. And actually he'd worked for the chairman of the board now, Dan Amos. And so I knew a little bit about insurance. And I said, well, this sounds pretty good. So foolishly, I joined that a long time ago and stuck with it during the off season. It was a great job for me to do in the off seasons. I would work incredibly hard selling insurance about 4.5, 5 months out of the year, also working out every day for baseball and then trying to pursue my baseball dreams. And so when I did finally get out and left Cincinnati my last year, I was ready to start in the business world. I mean, it was a much easier transition for me instead of sitting home, drinking, feeling sorry for myself, going, my career's over. What am I going to do? So I was able to transition that a whole lot smoother because I had prepared a whole lot longer.
And unlike the younger generations who see these astronomical athletic professional contracts and the athletes train all year round, the modern athlete never had to have off-season jobs. And what I want to ask you, Scotti, is, and that we talk about this often on the show, every athlete has to retire at some point, whether it is not of their doing, it's not their choice because they're injured or they get released or it's time, or they do make that decision. And I would assume that when you make the decision to retire or hang up your cleats on your own, that's a little easier decision than how hard it may be when it's forced upon you, so to speak. And being a professional baseball player, I know you had was it 10 or 11 years in the league. Were you ready to retire, or was it just kind of the writing on the wall and it was time to move to that next phase in life?
I'd like to play a little bit longer. I mean, I don't feel like they actually played as well as I could have played. I feel like I put a lot of pressure on myself because I might not play for 2 or 3 days. Then you got to go hit and I put a lot of self-pressure on myself. But I was playing at the time for Cincinnati, and Pete Rose was my manager. And I love Pete. And I was actually doing well early on, and ended up we were playing in Atlanta. In Atlanta, the pitchers' mounds were inside the stadium. They were right down the left field line, for us. And I remember there was a foul ball hit back over third base, and I took off and I ran, and somehow I ran up on that mound. Man, I came down on the back side of it, and I could feel I'd done something to my thigh. I mean, I like almost tore it. I knew I'd hurt it really bad. And, and I went and saw the trainer and everything. And the bottom line is Chris Sabo was out and they didn't want to call anybody else up. And he said, look, can you just play with pain? And I said, well, yeah. It certainly affected my swing from both sides of the plate. And that stayed with me, lingered with me for about 2 months. And I just, the season was over. I was released from Cincinnati. I was approached by the Chicago Cubs. I forget, Don Zimmer at the time was the manager of the Cubs. And I saw them at Opryland Hotel, and he goes, hey, we want you to come to big league spring camp. You'll start off in Des Moines, Iowa. If you play well, we'll call you up because someone's not going to do well. And I'm thinking, man, I've got a daughter now. Do I really want to do all this over again? And I just did not want to ride any more buses in AAA baseball. I just didn't want to do that. And so I knew it was time for me to, call it a day. I'd like to play a little bit more. It's just everybody likes to play a little bit more. Yeah. That's. I mean, you want to keep playing until they take the uniform off of you.
Well, Scotti, there's so many. This is not a baseball show, but I'm a baseball fan at heart. I could ask you about Marge Schott and everything else, but I want to stick on that Vanderbilt track for a few more minutes. Having the insurance work that you had done in the off season, did other ball players, other teammates, did you see others preparing for their post baseball careers, or were more of the players at that time just living in that world of, I'm going to be an athlete as long as I can, and this is all I got?
That's a good question. I remember being in, and I'll answer it this way. I was in AA baseball in San Antonio, Texas, and a roommate of mine was Johnny Franco, great left-handed pitcher, New York Mets, Cincinnati Reds. And I had received what they do. We're about to go on the road, and the equipment manager who does everything else, he's coming in there and he's passing out your mail. And I get this envelope, Vanderbilt University on there. And Johnny's sitting beside me on the bus, and we haven't taken off yet. And open up and look at it, and it's my diploma. Mm-hmm. And Johnny goes, "Holy shit, man, you got a diploma?" I'm going, "I guess so," like this, and man, he immediately stands up on the bus and reads this in front of everybody on the bus. This is to certify that Charles Scotti Madison, has fulfilled the requirements of Vanderbilt University and Bachelor of Science or whatever it says, along those lines. And man, the whole bus they clapped, standing ovation. Mm-hmm. Almost every one of those players over the course of the next week or 2 weeks on the side came up to me and said, "Man, I wish I had my college degree. I wish that I had either the discipline or the fortitude or the opportunity to have that college degree." And then it really stuck with me how important it was, because I think the only other person I played with for a long time was myself and Earl Hershiser. And it had college degrees, and nobody else did, and so that was to me was a great blessing. And having something like that, I think, really takes pressure off of you a little bit, because I was just enjoying the game, I was just having a good time, and these guys are going, "You don't have any pressure, dude. You got a degree. I got to make it. If I don't make it, I got to go back and get my degree and start all over." So I think that it goes back to the reason I chose Vanderbilt in the very beginning over Alabama and LSU. It meant something.
And in the business world, how often was your Vanderbilt connection, your Vanderbilt degree brought up either in conversation, or you just knew that because of where you had graduated from, it meant something in the business world?
Well, I was able to call on a lot of people that had gone to Vanderbilt, or I was calling somebody who didn't go to Vanderbilt, but they were answering to someone who went to Vanderbilt. So those certainly did pay off. I think I think the win-win for us on this call is going to Vanderbilt and playing a sport. That puts you sort of at a different level. It's one thing to graduate from the university. It's another thing to be in some type of competitive field, competitive nature with other people, and in the world of sports, and then also find the fact you've got a degree. That's what they were very interested in talking about, because they knew that you were set apart if you were in that particular area. So more than likely, they were going to listen to you, give you the time of day, because they knew that you weren't the average Joe, that was coming in there.
Playing quarterback and playing catcher have they're very similar in my minds. You're the leader on the field, and particularly at catcher, you see the whole field. You're not playing in right, you've got command of what you're doing. Did those skills that you developed, and I don't know if this is just an elementary question, so forgive me, but playing quarterback and playing catcher, did those skills translate into the business world for you?
I think they did. I think the thing about being a quarterback and a catcher is the fact, especially from a catcher standpoint, everybody's looking at you. Okay. I mean, the whole team is looking at you. If you got a bad attitude, it affects the whole team. Quarterback, same way. You got a bad attitude, I mean, they can tell your shoulders are slumping, you come off the field, your lineman can tell you in your cadence. The defense is going, dude, where is he today? He's not even here. I mean, you can sense, because you've practiced with somebody long enough and been out there on the field to know if they're up or if they're down. So I think both those are very important in order to set you apart, to make sure you've got to come in there with the right attitude. So obviously that it certainly carried over in business. That you've got to go into it, that You're not going to win every time, but you sure can go out there and put forth your best effort.
All right, we're almost.
You know, and the other thing too, you
Mhm.
know, you there?
I'm here.
Okay. The other thing too, I think it really is from an integrity standpoint. You know, your players, they know if you're being, you know, they know if you're being honest. They know if you're being, you know, good. They know if you're getting your rest at night. They know if you're, you know, you're going through all the difficulties and the hardships that they go through. They want to see someone who makes the sacrifices and the dedication, you know, that they do as well. So I think that again, that carries over from sports to business. At least it did for me from a quarterback standpoint and a catcher standpoint.
Scotty, we got just a couple of questions left before we cut you free, and I appreciate your time tonight and sharing your story. I know that you earlier you talked about the affection for living in Carmichael Towers. The statute of limitations is long expired on anything in the state of Tennessee that you may or may not admit to in the next 2 minutes. So we got to hear a story or two, whether you're at Jonesy's or Exit In or hanging out with the boys. Where were some places you guys would let blow off some steam?
Well, let me kind of tell you a crazy thing. So I wasn't dressing with the team, and these guys may remember we had a wide receiver by the name of Martin Cox, and he was from West Palm Beach. And Martin said, "Hey, look, my girlfriend is coming in. I need you to go pick her up at the airport, and she's going to stay in my room because it's a Friday night, and we're going to be staying at a hotel, you know, somewhere in Nashville." I said, "Sure." So I go and pick her up, and you know, she's got a little limp. She walks a little odd, you know, but I'm thinking maybe she got a bad hip or something like this, you know. And so she goes in the room and she, you know, kind of hollers at me because my room was right by his. And she said, "Look, I've got to take a shower." I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. I got to go down here and I got to make sure there's no guys in the shower and everything along those lines."
Mm-hmm.
And so I go, okay, like this. So next thing I know, she comes out the door and she's got a short robe on and she's got a leg missing. I'm going, "Where'd your leg go?" "Well, I didn't know you didn't have but one leg," like this, you know. And so I'm going, "Oh my gosh." I'm going, wait just a minute, you know. So I had to make sure everybody was cleared up. It was the oddest thing for me, you know, trying to take care of her. And then she said, "Well, can you get my leg and bring it to me?" I said, "What?" Like this, you know. So I said, "Well, you know," so she's in the shower area and I got to make sure no guys. And so I'm running down there as fast as I can to get her leg and try to bring it back to her, you know. And so anyway, I remember knocking on the door and saying, "Here's your leg." And she goes, "Just slide it over here to me." So I remember I just slid it over there to the showers. And I was standing outside, you know, somebody came up, maybe Mike Mitchell or somebody like that, or Roger Alsop, somebody. I said, "You don't want to go in here right now."
You'd think Martin would have given you a heads up.
You think Martin would have told me about it? You think he sure would have? But I remember being at Jonesy's and Larry Jones, and I saw him about 10 years after Jonesy's closed. I saw him at a golf tournament in Columbus, Georgia. I cannot believe it. So Larry Jones and Larry, my senior year when I didn't play football, I needed to make a little extra money. So he let me work back there and the bartender and give beers. You know, no one made drinks. You just gave people beers, you know. So it was my first night there. You know, you had pitchers, and so you had to clean the pitchers. So you had to go in the back, and you had one side of the thing that was soapy water, and the other side was fresh water. So I turned that water on, and I forgot I had turned that water on. And it wasn't 30 minutes later, that whole area was flooding. There was water all over Jonesy's, just packed with water and everything. And so finally, when everybody left, Jonesy said, "You stay here and you clean it up." I don't know who stayed with me, and that was a bunch of football players. But I said, "Look, here's the deal, guys. You can drink all the beer you want." So I gave everyone a pitcher, and we mopped that whole place up and cleaned it up. We probably got through at 2 a.m, and we had all the beer we wanted, but it was clean after that.
That's good stuff. You know, those are fun college times. They were much more innocent time, certainly back then. Who was, and this is going to kind of put you on the spot, who were some of the best athletes you competed against in the SEC or during your time at Vanderbilt, either baseball or football wise?
Well, you had a guy named Jeff Pyburn at Georgia. You know, Buck Bellew played 2 sports at Georgia. We played against Charlie the Great Alexander, you know, who was at LSU, great running back. Alabama had some great athletes. I remember Barry Krause was a great linebacker. I think Kenny Cole probably remembers him. Barry Krause is the guy who made that stop against Penn State on the 4th and goal.
Yeah.
You know, Barry was a great athlete. I mean, there were many. We had many in our own team. You know, I mean, Roby Lanius, I don't know if you guys remember him. Roby Lanius was from somewhere, Eufaula, Alabama. Man, he could dunk a basketball, and he just got on the sideways with our defensive back coach. Roby was a great athlete. You know, Mike Wright was a great athlete. Frank Mordecai could run. Ronnie Myrick may be one of the greatest athletes. Ronnie Myrick would hit you like nobody's business and can play basketball. So, I mean, he was a great athlete.
Let's take it into Major League Baseball. I'm going to just assume that Bo Jackson is going to be at the top of that list, but tell me who are some of the best.
You broke up on me there.
Let's take the same question into Major League Baseball experience, Scotty. Besides Bo being a natural athlete, who are the best baseball players you competed against or with?
Well, certainly Kurt Gibson. I mean, Kurt Gibson here, you know, great wide receiver at Michigan State, great baseball player. He was the greatest athlete I played with or against until I played with Bo.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had Barry Larkin was a great athlete. You know, even Tony Gwynn, you know, Kirby Puckett. I mean, these are just some people that could just do so much. But it's kind of interesting. A lot of the great athletes that were truly great athletes, could hit a ball a long way, could run like the wind. They didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they did not make it. You know, there was a couple exceptional players that had great work ethics. I mean, Bo being one of them. George Brett was probably my favorite player.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love George. I mean, he had such a great work ethic, you know, out there. But Alan Trammell, Lou Whitaker, and there's just I played with a lot of good people. Joe Carter was a great athlete. He could play basketball. He could throw a football. He was a great player. Most of the guys that it's interesting that played baseball professionally, they all played two sports.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they all played two sports in high school and some of them in college coming up, you know. Well,
Scotty, several of those names you just mentioned were multi-sport players in high school and college. But I want to leave you with one last question.
Listen, I got to leave on. Sorry, Sure.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say my wife's wanting to go to dinner here in a minute, but I do want to have one Dave Winfield story because you're talking about the great athletes here, okay? Mm-hmm. We're playing in Yankee Stadium, and I come in about the 7th or 8th inning. We play a 13-inning game, and Dave Winfield was an incredible athlete. He played 3 sports at the University of Minnesota, 6'7", 6'8". I mean, could run, throw, hit, he'd do everything. He'd hit a line drive. Our second baseman had jumped up, thought he was going to catch it. It bounced, hit the wall in right center field. I mean, that's what a frozen rope it was. So he comes up the 13th inning, and we're winning by 1 run. There's men on first and second, 1 out. And I was serious, really, you know. And Mr. Winfield, he comes to play. So Mr. Winfield said, "Hey, that was a great article about you last week in Sports Illustrated." Mm-hmm. He kind of looks at me, you know, and, you know, I just say, you know, and right before the pitch comes to say, "If I get it over to the locker room tomorrow night, would you sign it for me?" Like that, you know. And man, I evidently broke up his concentration. He hits a ground ball, double plays out. He hits first base. He turns and he like starts walking toward me. I'm going, oh boy. I like got to the dugout as quick as I possibly could because Dave Winfield and me would not have been a battle. Okay, no battle at all. So anyway, that was my only experience with Dave Winfield being the great athlete he was.
In all respect to your wife, I'm going to get you out of here in 30 seconds. Why are you proud of Vanderbilt University? What makes you? Well,
I'd say I'm more proud of Vanderbilt University about what they did and what they are. I feel like for me personally, Vanderbilt's a little bit liberal for me right now. I'm a little more on the conservative lines. I'll be honest with that. And so I'm not real proud of where they probably put God in the whole perspective of things. But as far as the university as a whole, I'm very proud of being a part of such a great institution and being able to call these guys who are either on this, watching this, or that I played with, you know, friends. I mean, there was just something about going there and getting that degree because it was not easy. It was very hard. It took a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. And there were a lot of days that I didn't think I was going to graduate. I mean, it was very difficult. in getting that degree, I've had more people go, wow, you graduated from Vanderbilt. And so I just think from an institution standpoint, it's still head and shoulders above everybody else. I really think there's a way of which we could really bring Vanderbilt back. What I'd like to see happen is some kind of form with all the athletes and the alumni, so that when a football player comes to Vanderbilt and he commits and he dots his name on his line, that when he gets out of the university, he is guaranteed he's going to have a job. There is no way that we cannot do that. There are too many people in too prominent positions across the United States, either athletes or non-athletes that graduate from Vanderbilt. They can make that happen. And when we can tie that knot together, we will catapult above every other institution.
Scotty, I couldn't said it better myself. Thank you for your time tonight. Please tell Mrs. Madison, thank you for letting us borrow this hour. But guys,
well, tell those boys hello, and thank you. Thank you. Hey, listen, go to my podcast. It's Not the Duck. I think, as you said, I think you'll enjoy it. In fact, next week, Eli Gold, the voice of the Alabama Crimson Tide, is going to be on.
Very good. Guys, this is why I do this show every week. Y'all come back next week. Anchor down.
And by the way, you did a great job. I know how hard it is. Good job answering the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Scotty.